Hello and welcome to the Gen X Dad and his Gen Z Teens podcast. This program takes a lighthearted look at generational differences about all sorts of topics. We explore everything from pop culture to history to relationships to politics, but only at a very shallow level. We don't aim to be controversial or be the authoritative voice on any topic. We are not social scientists or scientists of any sort for that matter. We are just here to rap about the things that we think are important and that we will have fun talking about. Also, it is my opportunity to publicly and on the record prove that I am right and my teens are wrong in all cases and that the 80s and 90s were absolutely the best time to grow up. So, without further ado, our topic for today is generational stereotypes. So what does that mean? Basically, we all tend to talk about different generations and the labels, and as a broad brush, we stereotype them. I'm basing a lot of this discussion on a speaker that I listen to and I found and I really enjoy, and that's Peter Zeihan. He's a political scientist and a demographer who I find just fascinating to listen to, and he's very entertaining when he starts breaking down the different generations. But I also find that I relate to a lot of what he says. A large amount of his work is on demographics, population pyramids, which I first off find very interesting, and I tend to agree with the things that he says. Now, it does help that he's a member of my generation, Gen X, and so I relate to him a lot in those ways too. But if you ever listen to any of his content, in many of his presentation, he talks about the four main current generations. Those are the boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z. Now, as I said, Peter is a Gen Xer like me, and what he says about our generation, I completely and utterly find true. And I think it's very entertaining to think about and to hear somebody say or talk about behaviors that I actually do see myself acting out. So to start, let's talk about the stereotypes of the big four generations, and we'll use that as our basis then to have our discussion with our Gen Z teens. So first and foremost, let's start with my generation, Gen X. We are stereotyped as cynical, we're grumpy, and primarily that's all because of the boomers. In a sense, as our generation is a smaller generation than the boomers, we don't really have much in the way of political power. The boomers outvote us, as they have outvoted everyone, and have basically voted for themselves. Now, let me put one more caveat. These are generational large group stereotypes. When I speak about this subject with, say, my mother-in-law, she gets very grumpy because she basically says, well, I don't fit that and I don't fit that. And yes, when you take it to any individual person, they don't fit. However, there are truisms when you look at it from the macro level, the big and complete generational thing. And so Gen X, we end up being cynical about the world. And part of that is just because our boomer parents, who were the early parts of the boomers, a lot of them were two working homes. And so we ended up being, the term latchkey kids, coming home, having to be pretty independent about ourselves. Cold War kids, in the sense we talked about on a previous podcast, that we grew up at any moment knowing that full-up nuclear exchange could occur between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, and then cynical that, in a sense, that we've never had a large enough voting bloc to have political power in ourselves. And it's even tougher now because, the boomers were the largest generation that ever existed, and we're sandwiched in between them and the millennials, which the millennials are mostly the back half of the boomer children. And they're a very large generation. And so we're going to be passed over as the millennials become the dominant generational political power. So that's the big Gen Xers. Next, the boomers. So the boomers, known for being entitled, hardworking, but their parents grew up during the Great Depression and World War II, and tended to make sure that their kids had all the things that they didn't have. Also, they're just the largest generation that's ever existed on the planet. And because of that, they've had immense political power and have voted in such a way. They have voted in their own interests. As far as everyone else, it tends to look like they are going to leave nothing for anyone else. They have been, in a sense, because they have voted for themselves, come across as a selfish generation, and that aren't going to leave anything for anybody else. I also think there's a truism that there is some degree, and again, this happens with every generation, that everybody's had it tougher than everybody else. But the boomers, other than the job market, which there were plentiful jobs, but they had to compete because they were such a large generation, they tend to just be delusional about how hard they had it. There was never a time where there was more support or the economy was better than when the boomers were growing up and going to college and entering the workforce. It was very good times for them. The one thing that did shape them, however, was the pressure to, because they were such a large generation, that put pressure on wages. So they had to become, for the most part, two-income households, and also drove up the education requirements. So jobs that traditionally didn't require college degrees, because a college degree gave you an advantage, everything became a college degree. And that, in effect, really, I think, set the stage for some of the difficulties that millennials have in regards to college debt that they have. And then ultimately, again, it's hard to see as the boomers just continue to age and continue to be a large block. Are they just going to take everything with them to the grave as they pass and leave just massive problems for everyone else? Millennials. Okay, millennials are stereotyped as spoiled, entitled, and basically the generation that everybody got a participation ribbon. The downside, though, is a large chunk of the millennials came of age, graduated college, and entered the workforce right in the midst of the Great Recession of 2007 and 2008. And so that has hampered some of their generational development in regards to wealth and career. They came into just a historically terrible job market. But the numbers speak for themselves. They are coming into their own now. They are now larger than the boomers. And that's going to come with political power that will allow them to start shaping the world in whatever image that they think that they can organize themselves around. That being said, it is with an overhang of giant amounts of student debt, and we'll see how all of that pans out. Gen Z. All right, so Gen Z is the smallest generation so far. They are the children of most of the Gen Xers. They are known for being incredibly tech savvy and also being not social. Partly because they were raised by a cynical Gen X. And here's what I do think is funny, because I do see myself doing this. When Peter Zion talks about the comparisons between millennials and Gen Z, he says, look at the literature. The books that were popular during the millennial time was Harry Potter. In a sense, everything works out because we all work together, we all have strengths, and we're going to defeat evil and good will be because we all work together. That's millennial literature. Gen Z, it's the Hunger Games. They've been raised, again, by that cynical Gen X generation, which has said, look, there's not going to be anything left for you. The boomers are taking it all. And so you're going to be left to your own. You're going to have to work harder than everybody else. You're going to have to compete with everyone else. And the proverbial, whatever the prize is, it's going to be thrown in the middle of you. And you're all going to have to defeat until there's one person standing. And that's the person who gets it. And that's the world you're entering. Kind of a dark place, but I'll be honest. I have said things like that to my kids, that there's not going to be anything left, that the boomers are going to take it all, and they're going to end up inheriting a world that's going to be very different than the one that the boomers, the Xers, and the millennials grew up in. So with that, guess the question is, as far as these stereotypes go, is Peter wrong? So I'll start with my teens, and we'll see just what do you think about those stereotypes. And it just can be as easy as, is there truth to it, or no, and you see things differently. Just give me a little spill on what you think about some of those stereotypes.
I think there is a lot of truth to most of the stereotypes. It is tough because obviously when you're stereotyping something as big as a generation, you miss out on a lot. But yeah, I mean, I think overall it's pretty truthful for each generation.
I kind of think the same thing, that most of it is right, but I don't think Gen Z is as antisocial as most people. Like, I think it's just exaggerated a lot more than it actually is.
And there's probably some fairness in that. Okay, so I think the way we'll do this is we'll do some of the questions as we go forward. So first off, why don't you talk about me? So that Gen X stereotype, how do you think I fit into that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you fit into that pretty well. Obviously, I think there's some similarities between Gen X and kind of all the generations that followed it, and that kind of the way we view the boomers and kind of what they've done and the stuff they're going to leave us. So, yeah, I think you kind of do fit that.
Yeah, I think you're almost the textbook definition of the Gen X stereotype. You're cynical, and you tell us that we have to work harder than everyone else and that the boomers are going to take everything.
Yes, I do. Yeah, I'm grumpy at the boomers. That being said, my parents are early part of the boomers. I can't complain in that regard, but as a generation, I just look and go, my God, you guys are just destroying everything is my attitude. All right, let's talk about your friends. So let's talk Gen Z in particular. So let's just start with the first one, tech savvy. Kind of yes, no?
Yeah. I mean, well, especially in comparison to previous generations, I mean, yeah, we're way more tech savvy than anyone I think has ever been. But obviously it varies between persons. So.
Yeah, I think Gen Z is just way farther ahead in terms of tech savviness, because we just grew up on this stuff, phones, computers. We just grew up on all of that, so we know how to use it better than everyone else.
That is true, and I can vouch for that. And I can vouch for it by just how much time you guys spend on it, even despite my best efforts to try and get you to diversify. But I will say this, you guys did get devices not earlier than most. I mean, we tried to hold off as long as we could, but there's only so much we can do when every other child has some sort of device. And so, yes, you guys have basically grown up with almost no memories of anything without having a device. All right, talk to me about your friends. Do you find you guys are like at high school and your school and everything else, do you feel like hyper competitive? Are people just really thinking Hunger Games, like everybody wants to be number one? Does that seem like a stereotype?
No, honestly, not really. I think if anything, it's a little bit of the opposite of. I think there's a lot of people that just don't care. So yeah, I mean, I don't know.
It kind of depends on who you're talking to, because some people don't care and others are like super competitive, but it just depends.
Okay, and some of it could be driven by parents. I mean, putting people into club sports and all the other stuff that goes with that. Talk to me about college. Do people talk about college a lot?
Yeah, I think people do, but I think it's less of a thing than it might have been before. I just think obviously with how expensive it is, and a lot of people are just kind of in the mindset that they don't need it, they don't need the debt, and they'll be better off without it.
Okay, that's an important thing because that's relatively new with things changing. Okay, all right. Do you guys ever find yourselves in conversations, and again, talking about, and whether it's within school or whatever, but the generations come up. So the issues, climate change, the environment, social justice, just things like that. Do you guys find that there are ever conversations that come up on a routine basis-ish, if you will, where you find like, man, it just, once the boomers are different or once we're in charge, do those words kind of ever segue into different topics?
I don't know, maybe a few times like in class and stuff, but other than that, no. We don't really talk about anything like that. Usually it's just kind of, I don't know, like basic kind of teenager stuff, not stuff about the world or whatever.
Yeah, I never hear anyone like talk about that stuff like with their friends. It might come up in a class, but nobody really cares that much or is thinking that far ahead.
Okay. And so when you guys went, I mean, you still occasionally do it with the whole okay boomer, even though I am not a boomer. Is that still a common insult that people will throw at? Okay, they're shaking their head saying no. All right. Yeah, that was annoying because I'm not a boomer. I'm a Gen Xer, and we're the best. Okay. So is there anything else? I mean, you guys, I've had you sit and listen to some of the Peter Zehan stuff. Is there anything else you guys would like to comment or what you think or hope for the generations? I mean, and we'll wrap it up on that. What do you think about, do you think things are going to get better with the change in generations that are happening?
Yeah, I think a little bit. Like you said, my generation is a smaller generation. So, hopefully that'll kind of mean more opportunity and actually maybe a little less competition, just because there's going to be less people. So, yeah.
I think things will get better with the changed generations, just because we're smaller and we have a more like updated view on things instead of just like the view of the world that the boomers have and Gen X and millennials. We're more up to date on things.
Okay, and I would agree with that. And I think that's a typical generational thing. You're obviously going to be more up to date. I'm glad you're looking forward to the future. Again, the stereotype is Gen Z just wants to sit in a closet and code. I don't think that's true. I don't see that necessarily with you guys. I do think it's we've talked about before, some of the socialization is very different. But again, in a lot of ways, I don't see you guys as dramatically different other than you spend too much time on your devices. But I think every parent has ever said that to their kids. Okay, well, that's all we have for today. Hope you enjoyed our discussion talking about generational stereotypes. If you liked the content, please support the channel by hitting the like button and follow us. Again, we're trying to get episodes out each week moving forward. So I want to thank you. This has been the Gen X Dad and his Gen Z teens, and we'll see you again for the next episode. Bye.